With permission, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'd like to make a statement regarding the full opening of our schools and colleges from this week. But before I do, I'd like to update the House on the current position regarding exam results for this year's GCSE and A-level students. As the House will be fully aware, exams had to be cancelled this year because of a COVID-19 outbreak. Students have now received results for GCSE, AS and A-levels, as well as vocational and technical qualifications that will allow them to progress to the next stage of their lives. The independent regulator, Ofqual, had put in place a system for arriving at grades that was believed to be fair and robust. It became clear, however, that there were far too many inconsistent and unfair outcomes for A and AS level students, and that it was not reasonable to expect these to be dealt with even through a boosted and enhanced appeals process. Instead, students have been awarded the grades which schools and colleges estimated they were most likely to have achieved, or their calculated grades if they were higher. Mr. Deputy Speaker, this situation has, I know, caused a great deal of stress and uncertainty, and I'm deeply sorry that those who have borne the brunt of it have been students themselves. I can only apologise to them again for this. We took immediate action to provide certainty as soon as it was clear that if we didn't, too many students would have received grades that didn't reflect their hard work and their ability. For vocational and technical qualifications, the situation was different because most were not subject to standardisation like GCSE and A-level grades. However, awarding organisations that did use a similar model have also reviewed their results. This has been done to ensure that each student has been treated as fairly as possible. We recognise, however, that some students may still be unhappy with their summer grade, and for some, there was not enough evidence for any grade to be awarded at all, such as those who are home-educated students. To support these students, we are running an extra exam series in all subjects at GCSE, A and AS levels in the autumn. Additional opportunities will also be provided for some other vocational and technical qualifications which received calculated grades. We've also been working with further and higher education sectors to manage applications for this year's places. To ensure students can progress to higher education, we intend to remove temporary student number controls which have been introduced for the coming academic year. We set up the Higher Education Task Force, and we are working closely with the sector to create additional capacity and encourage them to be as flexible as possible. Providers have agreed to honour all offers to students who meet the conditions of their offer wherever this is possible. In the event that a course is full, universities will give students a choice of suitable alternative courses if they are happy to take it, or a deferred place if they would prefer to wait an additional year. This year, many more students have been successful in meeting the required grades to study medicine and dentistry, and the government has removed the caps on student numbers in place on both of these subjects. The Ofqual board has agreed temporary arrangements with Ofsted to support the ongoing work on this summer's GCSEs, A and AS levels, and vocational qualifications, including appeals and autumn exams, and preparations for next year's exam season. We are determined that exams and assessments will go ahead next year, and we're working with the sector to ensure that this is done as smoothly as possible. The former Chief Regulator, Sally Collier, has decided that the next stage of the awarding process would be better overseen by new leadership. As a result, the Ofqual board has asked Dame Glenys Stacey to act as acting Chief Regulator until December 2020. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Sally Collier for the commitment she has shown over the past 4 years and wish her well. While none of this disruption is what we wanted for our students. I believe that they now have the certainty and reassurance they deserve and will be able to embark on the next exciting phase of their lives. I hope the whole House will join me in wishing all of them the very best for their future. Mr. Speaker, I'd now like to turn to the full opening of our nation's schools and colleges. Welcoming pupils back will be a massive milestone for schools across the country. On the 2nd of July, we published detailed plans for nurseries, schools, special schools and colleges that set out what was required to deliver this full return as safely as possible for all of our children. The guidance has been developed with medical and scientific experts and Public Health England and follows regular engagement with the education sector. The recent letter from all 4 UK chief medical officers, which emphasised the low risk of long-term harm from COVID-19 due solely from attending school in comparison to the high risk of long-term harm from not attending school, particularly for more vulnerable children and young people, has, I hope, given parents extra assurance that with the protective measures in place, our pupils are returning to a safe environment and an environment they will gain so much from. As they return, Mr. Deputy Speaker, pupils will be kept in consistent groups and older children will be encouraged to distance wherever possible. At a minimum, this will mean keeping whole year groups in schools and colleges separate. This is in addition to the other protective measures, such as an enhanced cleaning and hand washing. We've also advised that pupils in secondary schools should wear face coverings in communal areas if there is a local lockdown in place, unless they are exempt. Strict hygiene protocols are in place and PPE is being distributed to every school to bolster their supplies for use in the unlikely event that a pupil develops COVID symptoms on the premises. A small number of home test kits are also being distributed for anyone who develops symptoms and who would not otherwise have access to testing themselves. All schools will also have access to direct support and advice from local health protection teams to deal with any cases that may occur. Together with colleagues from the Department for Transport, we've announced an additional £40 million in funding for local transport authorities to ease pressure on public transport. We've also published guidance for local authorities to manage capacity and reduce the risk of infection on school transport. We have urged all students and staff to walk or cycle to school or college if this is a suitable alternative for themselves. I know that these past few months have been some of the most challenging that schools, parents, and most of all children have faced. I'd like to take this opportunity to applaud all of our dedicated education staff for the incredible efforts that they have made to keep children learning at this difficult time. Mr. Speaker, I am confident that we have the necessary preparations in hand to ensure a successful return for all of our pupils, and I commend the statement to the House. Thank you.
Kate Green.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Secretary of State for his statement this afternoon. But, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'm afraid I must complain that I did not receive advance sight of it until 4:36 p.m. You will know that the Ministerial Code required that I should have had it much, much sooner. I'm welcoming the Secretary of State back to his place after a summer of chaos, incompetence and confusion that has caused enormous stress to children, young people, their families and their teachers. Ministers must now learn from their mistakes and ensure that keeping schools open and pupils learning is a national priority. Labour is absolutely clear. We want children back in school and we want them to stay there. I'll always work constructively with the Secretary of State to achieve that, and I hope he will hear my questions this afternoon in that constructive spirit. Because while I'm delighted that the vast majority of schools will reopen fully in the next few days, there remain many issues of concern. Let me start with the ongoing situation regarding this summer's exam results. After days of confusion following A-level results day, the Secretary of State finally heeded calls from young people and from the Labour Party and accepted the centre assessed grades, the CAGs. And while that was the right thing to do, it leaves many of the problems created by his previous flawed standardisation model unresolved. The Secretary of State should have known of the risks. It's been reported that a former senior official of the department raised serious concerns. So can he tell the House when he first knew of the potential problems with his approach and what he did about them? What advice was he given specifically about BTEC students who faced more uncertainty and delay? Can he now assure us that all BTEC students have received their results? He alluded to external candidates who don't have a CAG and they remain in a difficult situation. I don't think they will find the offer of resits sufficiently reassuring, but perhaps the Secretary of State can tell us what support they will receive as they undertake those exams. And there are also significant consequences for higher education, as the Secretary of State rightly noted. Can he tell the House how many young people who missed their first choice university because of his now discredited approach to awarding grades have not been granted those places? What assessment has he made of the impact on universities that will lose students because they can now take up their original choice? What discussions has he had with the Treasury about providing those institutions with additional financial support? Mr. Deputy Speaker, turning now to the reopening of schools, we're all pleased to see children return to class. School is the best place for them to be, not only for their learning, but for their emotional and social well-being. And I pay tribute to the school staff who've worked through the holidays to welcome them back safely. The test now for the Secretary of State is that pupils continue to receive a full education throughout the year and catch up on the learning they've lost. So when will pupils begin to receive support through both the catch-up premium and the National Tutoring Fund? And why are the early years and post-16 providers ineligible for the catch-up premium? Why is the funding available for just a single year when the impact of any further disruption to education is so significant? Can he guarantee that every child will have full access to learning in the event of a local lockdown? Parents' top priority as schools return is the well-being of their children. What plans does the Secretary of State have to provide additional pastoral support? What extra support will be available for children with special educational needs and disabilities? Parents will not be able to return to work without childcare and wraparound care. What plans does he have in place to ensure every parent can access the care they need? And can he tell us a little more about how he will ensure all children travel safely to school, including respecting social distancing on public transport? And finally, what additional financial support, if any, will schools receive to cover any additional specific COVID-related costs this term? Turning to the year ahead, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I was glad to read this morning that the Secretary of State has apparently once again listened to Labour and is going to delay exams in summer 2021. Pupils entering Year 11 and Year 13 have already experienced significant disruption to their learning, and the assessment process must recognise that. But schools, colleges and universities need time to plan. So can he say what discussions he's having with the sector and with UCAS to ensure workable arrangements are in place? And can he guarantee that a contingency plan will be put in place this month in case exams are disrupted again? Mr. Deputy Speaker, children and their families should have been the government's top priority. But for weeks, their interests have taken a backseat while the Secretary of State U-turned on everything from CAGs to face masks and left officials to take the blame. He must now take responsibility for ensuring that a summer of incompetence does not descend further into an autumn of disaster and dismay. I implore him to listen to the concerns of parents, of teachers, and of the Labour Party. He must now make the education of our children and young people a national and his personal priority.
Secretary of State.
Well, thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and apologies for the Honourable Lady for receiving the statement late, and will ensure that that doesn't happen again in the future. And I'm delighted to hear that it's the party opposite's their priority to see all children going back. It's a refreshing change from the leadership that the Honourable Lady is showing to that of her predecessors, who was more ambivalent about children returning back to school, when this side of the House has continuously argued for children to be back in the classroom at the earliest possible stage. The Honourable Lady raises some important issues about children that are not in a situation where they're in school, so they haven't been able to receive centre-assessed grades. This was always an issue that we recognise that was going to present challenges. That's why that we put forward an autumn series, as there was going to be no other viable way in order to be able to provide that assessment. She raises important points about higher education. This is vital, and I'd also like to flag up some of the challenges in the FE sector, as not everyone is going to be progressing on to university. Many of them, youngsters, will want to take the opportunity to progress on to further education, and we've been working with both sectors to ensure that that is the case. But in terms of the higher education and university sector, we'll be increasing funding through the teaching grant. We've also lifted the cap on medicine and dentistry places to create extra capacity within the system as well. We have also seen a drop-off in the number of students coming from European Union countries that would traditionally have come to the UK in order to study, and obviously this has created extra capacity within the system as well. On this side of the House, we've already delivered a £1 billion COVID catch-up fund that is targeted at helping the youngsters from the most disadvantaged backgrounds, the most deprived backgrounds, and we've actually used evidence to see how we can help and how we can improve their outcomes, working with the Education Endowment Foundation to ensure that that money is targeted at interventions that will deliver results. And the Honourable Lady touches upon exams and the potential about putting exams back. Now, back in June, in this House, in answer to my honourable friend, the member for Elmerton Rothwell, this was something that we highlighted that we'd be doing. On the 2nd of July, Ofqual Dear Day public consultation about potentially moving the exam dates back. I've been to check as to whether the Labour Party made a submission as to whether they supported this. The Labour Party did not make a submission supporting the idea of moving exams back. So I very much welcome the Labour Party to our position. We will continue to work with local authorities in ensuring that we have the transport infrastructure in place. I've touched upon the fact that £40 million has been made available. Transport for London, other transport authorities have been working very closely with the Department for Transport and the Department for Education, and most importantly with schools, to try and deal with any transport bottlenecks that may occur. We'll continue to work with all local authorities to ensure this is done as smoothly as possible, and it's absolutely vital. We do everything we can do to ensure every child has the opportunity to get back to school. We all know, I think we all know in this House, on both sides, how important it is to see all children benefiting from a brilliant education, having the opportunity to be back in the classroom, to be inspired by their teachers. That is what we're going to be delivering. That is what we're going to be seeing over this week and next week as all schools return and they welcome their pupils back.
Virtual link. Robert Halfon.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I thank the my right honourable friend for the statement. And our Select Committee report, the Education Committee report in July, suggested a delay in the date of the exams. And given that we now know that millions of children have not been learning during the lockdown, does my right honourable friend agree that the way forward should be an urgent assessment or benchmarking made of all children in school, with data collected by the DfE, Department for Education and regulators, so as to inform the government's decision as to when the exams are to take place next year?
Secretary State.
My right honourable friend makes an important point about the importance of benchmarking and making an assessment as to where pupils are. This is something that we're looking at, will be doing, and working with a broad, right across the sector to ensure there's a clear understanding of where some of the learning gaps that children have in order for us to best deal with it. But it will also be absolutely vital in terms of informing policy for the coming year ahead.
Video link. Carol Moynihan.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Secretary of State for advance sight of his statement. I nearly had time to read it before he started speaking. Scottish schools have been back for 3 weeks now, and although there have been cases of COVID, track and trace has meant that disruption has been kept to a minimum. Can I thank everyone who has helped prepare our schools for reopening, and can I wish the schools in Northern Ireland, England and Wales the very best of success as they start to return. Of course, this has been a summer of confusion for young people across the UK who found themselves at the mercy of algorithms. When Scotland's young people received their results on the 4th of August, it became clear that something had gone wrong. But John Swinney sat down, he listened to the young people, he apologised for the turmoil, and crucially, he took decisive action. Predicted grades were awarded, and new funding was found for universities to ensure that any young people with the entry grades would secure their place. Despite what the Secretary of State has said this afternoon, his actions were certainly not immediate. He had both foresight and time on his side, but squandered both, managed to mess up further over the validity of appeals, and by the time of his U-turn on results, university places had been lost. The Schools Minister has maintained that he did not see the algorithm until results day, suggesting that something went wrong with its implementation. So what questions were ministers asking prior to the publication of results? And did anyone ask for a trial run of the algorithm? Whilst there are calls for a delay to next year's exams, any postponement introduces further issues in terms of marking and certification. So what consideration has been given to rationalise courses that would allow quality, rich learning rather than superficially covering everything in a reduced time? Now, I know the Secretary of State is reluctant to follow Scotland's lead on anything, but Scottish youngsters have accepted the need for masks in corridors without any great issues. So why is he determined that England will not follow WHO advice? This does not need local lockdowns in order to wear masks. Young people are willingly participating. He has a duty of care to young people and to teachers. On any normal cabinet, his repeated failure to take responsibility would lead to his sacking. But in this blame-passing government, when the PM himself talks of mutant algorithms, his quote's not even on a sugary peg. So will he now listen to scientific advice and ensure pupils, staff and the wider school community are as safe as possible as their schools return?
Secretary of State.
Well, the Honourable Lady will probably have witnessed the fact that over 1.6 million children returned to school before the summer holidays here in England. And it's interesting as to why she raises the fact of listening to the best scientific and medical advice. That's exactly what we do. And we follow the best scientific and medical advice at every stage. That was something the Scottish Government didn't do when it didn't listen to the Chief Medical Officer in Scotland that didn't support their proposal, and what was basically a political decision as against one that was informed by the best science and medicine on fake.
Laura Trott.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. There have been many individual initiatives over the summer to help children catch up, including the brilliant Invicta Academy, which was started in Kent. But can my right honourable friend outline the steps his department is taking to help all children catch up, especially the most deprived, who we know have been hardest hit by the gap in education?
Well, it's great to hear about the brilliant work of the Invicta Academy, and we've seen brilliant examples right across the country of schools doing so much to support the learning when children have been out of school, but also over the summer as well. But the reason that we've got the £1 billion COVID catch-up fund is we recognise more needs to be done, more assistance and more help needs to be available. That's why £350 million of that fund is targeted for those children from the most disadvantaged backgrounds, those children who need the most support in order to catch up, to ensure that their life chances aren't impacted by this virus. And I very much hope that my honourable friend will see the benefits of that in Sevenoaks and right across Kent.
Venu Mishra. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. More than 14,000 schools submitted a claim for exceptional costs since schools closed in March. What does the Secretary of State think will happen when that support is simply cut off this term?
Well, as my very honourable gentleman would know, that we've announced last year a £14.4 billion increase in terms of school funding. This was a 3-year deal. We're seeing this rolled out in this academic year, the following academic year, and the year after that, which will have a truly beneficial effect to every pupil right across the country.
Marco Longhi.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Secretary of State for the statement he brought to the House today, but also thank him and all of his team for the huge efforts they've put in during this summer period, during an evolving situation that must have been really, really difficult to manage. Could I ask my right honourable friend if he agrees with the results from a recent study showing that the risks to children from COVID-19 are actually very tiny, and that the benefits children will gain from a return to school far outweigh any risks posed by COVID?
Well, I'm very aware that my constituency neighbour, who has been out campaigning and doing everything he can do to get all children back in his constituency, back into school, is a real champion of the educational achievements and what children are doing right across Dudley North. But he's right to highlight the study, the fact that there will be more harm that's done to children by them not returning to school than actually coming back to school. We all know the benefits, and it's not just in terms of education, but it's also in terms of a physical health and mental health that children gain for being back into school. That's why it was vital to open schools up before the summer, and that's why it's so vital to have every child back into school, enjoying the true joy of what school is able to offer them.
Jonathan Edwards.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, watching the A-level results fiasco from back home in Wales, it seemed that the policy of the Labour government of my country closely resembled the policy of his department. Can he outline how closely both governments were working together?
Mr. Deputy Speaker, it's fair to say that both in the SNP in Scotland, the Conservatives in terms of the approach in terms of English schools, Labour and the Liberal Democrats in Wales, and the DUP and Sinn Féin in Northern Ireland had a very common approach. And the party opposite, as well as all parties, have been of a view that having been in a position of having calculated grades and moderation within the system was an important part in ensuring fairness within the system. So it was a common political consensus across the United Kingdom.
Alan Cairns.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Can I recognise the Secretary of State and the ministerial team's focus on supporting pupils and parents and teachers throughout what has been one of the most difficult periods in policy development, and recognise that these challenges have been equal in all parts of the United Kingdom. My constituents have faced similar difficulties as those in England, as the Secretary of State has just recognised. But can I pay particular tribute to my right honourable friend for the guidance that has led to so many pupils returning to school? And does he also recognise that guidance is guidance and it cannot account for every circumstance, and that judgments will need to be made at the most local of levels?
Secretary of State.
I think my right honourable friend makes a valid point, and as he'll know all too well, across the Vale of Glamorgan, so many schools have different pressures and sort of different needs. You see this right across England as well, whether it's a school that's got 40 pupils or a school that's got 1,400 pupils. They need to adapt and sort of change in order to ensure they create a safe and secure environment for those pupils, but also those who are working in the school. But of course, by doing that, they create greater safety and confidence in the wider community. So guidance is there to support teachers, to support head teachers and all those who work in schools. But what it is leading to is all schools returning and the opportunity for all pupils to benefit from a great education.
Video.